responsibilities of the government, and this is something more than just bringing down the laws. And we would like that the ideologies of openness within the government and the executive and the legislative branches of the power, in those experts and the civil activists who are working in order to have more access to the people to the different information, and also to explain to them this information for them to give them a chance to speak up their minds regarding transparency of the government's action, how it tells upon the our society. I'll give the floor to Sergei Leshchenko because he's going to take part in the session of Verkhovной Rada. You know, they already taught us not to be late for the sessions, and they cannot be late there. So, with your permission, as soon as I'm through with my speech, I'm going to leave you the story. On late, we had some revolutionary transformation, which the public at large does not notice, because we understand we are living with the major current events, but we are not talking about the implementation of European practice, but maybe we're ahead of European practice. We'll start with the registers, and here the Minister of Justice's role cannot be overestimated. It's huge because the Minister of Justice opens more than even the registers in Europe. Me, as the journalist, I encountered the situation when we had to open some kind of the different register. You cannot say that the company belongs, let's say, to Mr. Smith. We have to show that this specific oligarch owns millions upon millions, and that's why we had to use some illegal basis during the Yanukovych presidency, and we had to fill out different forms, and we had to wait for those forms for weeks, and not always they were coming in time. Now we have kind of paradise for the investigating journalists. You just open the register, you can see who is the founder company, where they have been registered. In another register, you can see the address of the real estate, which is owned by the founders or some political figures, and also we have the register which will have information about the vehicles belonging to the internal person. I believe in Europe they do not have this last register. Even with the minister, we are thinking, shouldn't we open the register for those people who have the chance to open their, investments in other countries, or who possess real estate in other countries. As for the second issue, yesterday was something unexpected in a good sense of that, and the consequence of what happened, nobody can assess that, but I believe as time passes, you will do that. We opened the whole information about the political donors of the parties. Also, we introduced the responsibility, including criminal responsibility, for illegitimate or illegal finance of the parties. And the parties received the alternative source of financing, let's say, starting from next year, the political parties could get the financing from the public budgets, especially those who, for whom voted more than 2% of the voters. So that's what we are talking about, the window for the smaller and newly founded parties as a requirement of the European Union. I would like to thank the minister. They supported the deputies' initiatives. They called back the governmental proposal, and of course the huge role here is our partners from the United States, European Union, who support this draft law, which received the green light regarding the demands for the visa-free regime. I can't remember when any draft law could be adopted without any push on the part of the European Union, in a good sense of that. But I appreciate the work of our deputies, because this is kind of fresh air gulp over. And of course, we are going, in the end of the story, we are going to reform our political system. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. And Sergei, maybe for some additional comments. Thank you very much for a very clear definition of the, let's say, importance of those laws. But generally speaking, what kind of, what do you think, how is going to affect, roughly speaking, the political culture, meaning the effect on those who we call oligarch or the Premier League or the, let's say, second league, whatever else, speaking about the passing decisions or taking decisions in Ukraine. I understand we cannot assess that within the, 1 or 2 years, maybe even more, but maybe there is already some kind of reaction or some kind of response to, or some vision how it can modify the behavior of those who we are talking the powers that be. We can just forecast how it's going to be. This is the European experience which all the European countries lived through. In Germany, they had that with the 60s years last century in the post-Soviet space, the Warsaw Treaty camp. They started to do that after the disintegration of the Soviet Union. Wherever they introduced that, if the corruption was not combated to the end, but at least they started to put to prisons more people. You know that in Poland, in the Baltic states, there were a lot of scandals with some top political figures, and this is a very sensitive topic. There is always some kind of abuse of their right or their position. Remember Sarkozy in France, I don't want even to mention Berlusconi in Italy, because this is the sphere where the public interests or the citizens' interests comes into conflict with the interests of big corporations. When we do not have the funding from the budget, we just give away this sphere to the oligarch. When we start to put our hands into this pocket of the public at large, starting from this point of time, the citizens have to follow up how this money is spent, every cent or a kopeck. It doesn't matter whether it's money belonging to Kolomoisky or to the public budget, because we are talking about funding coming from taxpayers. There will be some citizens who are going to act through their institutions, through the investigating journalists, who are going to search special register in order to check whether this is a kind of people without home, or maybe he can donate something, some big sum of money, but lives somewhere in the countryside, in the let's say godforsaken place. I remember the case with the let's say the guard of the Yanukovych, who donated a lot of money for the political party. And we are talking about the specific actions which will be the people who commit those violations. They're going to be responsible in criminal ways through court, etc. Today, most happy are those parties which are represented in the parliament, because some of them demanded this law to be adopted and effected as soon as possible. And I support them in their wish here, because it's going to become effective on July 1st next year. We proposed January 1, 2017, but if we are going to do that sooner the better. But we still have to only 2 months to give all the people a chance to bring order in their finances. We are going to create a new infrastructure, new institution for the control over political finances. Thank you. In fact, it's a very interesting situation we have actual initiative to introduce this norm about half a year before time. And that means that this party organizational opportunity, capabilities to bring their party to power, because they initiated it. Politicians are very interesting people, and not always a political figure is motivated by getting as much money as possible. And sometimes a political figure who is really ambitious to become president or prime minister, it's better for him to have the legal money for his company than to meet some oligarch in, let's say, in sauna or in a restaurant, and then each of them will have some compromising material to each other, and then you become the slave of that oligarch. So those people are happy to get as soon as possible to use illegal money, owing to which they will be able to compete in the political process with their competitors. That's why the party, which I remember collected information about the availability of illegal source of finance. Now they are voting for that, and I believe that their logic is absolutely understood and logical. Thank you very much. Since you have to leave, maybe somebody from the audience has one or two questions to you, so that we can give you a chance to get back to the Verkhovna Rada to take care of your duties. If there are no questions, thank you very much that you joined us today, because this is a very important topic, and we have to actually to further on and to explain how dynamically it's going to be implemented, because we have to use all the opportunities to implement or to affect the law. Thank you very much once again, and I would like once again to thank Mr. Minister for the fact that they did their best for this law to be adopted. And I assume Pavlo yesterday, who, like me, we were very much concerned about that, and that we were afraid that the failure to adopt that law would have some negative consequences, and we were happily surprised how this draft law was smoothly adopted. Thank you. And I turn the mic to Minister of Justice Pavlo Petrenko, who this week actually was involved in more to access to more information about providing the openness, of the information regarding the political figures and the top echelon authority figures. So I would like you to explain how we're going to provide this access to the registers, and also what political objectives and consequences you can visualize further on. Good morning. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak here with you and communicate with you here. Indeed, they very often use the notion of reform, and our citizens are sick and tired of hearing this word, because sometimes they are just substitute some slogans or whatever, some projects are never being implemented for this word. There is such a clear position that any reform is irreversible only in those cases when, after the changing the power, the reform cannot be called back, or let's say take a reverse course. In those countries where they took care of a number of the key reforms, unfortunately there is a big risk of a revanchist movement, let's say, come back. We unfortunately can see the same problem in the post-Soviet space, when the democratic governments are replaced by the, let's say, by the criminal governments, and or whatever, the dictators. And then, unfortunately, I'm not going to use this word reform, it's kind of discredited, but I'm talking about some things which change the situation in the country in the civil agency. First of all, I'm going to talk about what affects transparency, any kind of the hidden information, like the closed nature information about the politician, about their property or their business. This is the way to non-transparent situation, or the influence on their activities on the part of different industrial groups or business groups. And again, and we are talking about some of the citizens or oligarchs of the first or second category. So we decided to launch in this country the process of opening the information which is available to the government. I'm talking about the public information, or whatever we did last year. We, as the Ministry of Justice, we had a pilot. We were the first to try to open the registers. I had a very simple answers. When somebody told me that this is an intervention in our private life, I give them an example. If you're a public figure, you have your top priority is your activities in our social life. If you're afraid that somebody is going to jump over your fence and will picture or photograph your real estate, but sorry, if this is legal house you have or the property, you don't have to be afraid of anything. But if this is something illegal, then, excuse me. Okay, if a person would like to go into the politics, this person has to understand that there are some restrictions or limitations which this person doesn't have if he is or she is a businessman or businesswoman. And those were the first steps we took last year when we to a maximum extent opened the registers. I believe there is nothing special and nothing scary, and when we target at all these civil servants, we can check the information about their business, about their surrounding environment, their real estate, but property, but all these positively affects the business. Maybe you can improve me, but if there is the information open access regarding this or another real estate, but this is a good prevention, a tool to combat fraud. Because if you create some fraudulent necessary conditions for the fraudulent people to steal this or another property, they will be checked here. In those countries where those registers are open, for example, the fraud cases or on the let's say the stealth or whatever else, or the number of that drastically dropped. Any kind of form can be stolen. The signature could be actually forged, and you can buy a special court decision. But when you, as a buyer, decide to buy real estate, you have another barrier in order that you just avoid the criminals or the fraudulent people who would like to sell this property to you and who actually signed this agreement with you or the contract. We checked online in the European Union member states. This kind of contract about the property, real estate, is just signed on the piece of paper which is notarized later. Again, if you're talking about the first module block of the issues which regulation can start to talk about, I would like to focus your attention on another reversible reform, which is a kind of the fuse, or let's say the prohibitory regarding the negative effects. I'm talking about decentralization. Any centralization or the concentration of the power in the same hands, this number one. The way there is also always a temptation to create the totalitarian model. Then we are talking about the restriction limitation of the development. And I can give you an example of my ministry. When I became minister last year, that was to maximum extent centralized regarding all the decisions or functions which the Ministry of Justice has, starting from registration in real estate, let's say implementation of the rulings of the court, etc., etc. And this was done so that the manager of the ministry could control the corruption process on different sides. But centralization of the authorities is the kind of deception of the officer to the extent that he seemingly can exercise control over the whole system. He can control, let's say, the bribing, but he cannot do anything to make this system work efficiently. And that's why I believe that for us the reversible reform is decentralization, delegation of the authorities and powers to the local communities. This is the reform which will prevent any attempts to have come back at the national level. When we have a strong community with a lot of powers and authority, it would be able to protect itself from any kind of any decision imposed on the part of the authorities at the national level. We can see now that in small town regional center, it would be impossible to give away from them whatever they earn. It would be impossible to say, let us give us an additional 4 billion or 4 billion of hryvnia with the small town made. It would be impossible to do that political wise, and I believe that the same will be done by other bodies, agencies and ministries, which now carry out some kind of natural to them functions, for example, be involved in the control over registration of the agricultural machinery in some kind of populated area. This is not the function of the Minister of the Agro-Industrial Complex. The same, we cannot register the registration, control the registration of the apartment, let's say, in some district city of the Lviv region. This is responsibility and function of the local authorities, which actually get the money for that to provide the necessary services to people who speak in, who live in a specific place in specific region. This is more natural to do that in the spot, so to say, than for the Minister of Justice. The second module and block is decentralization. We finish the process of decentralization, then we will achieve irreversible thing, and we'll be able to prevent any kind of temptation to return to totalitarian regime, because the governments change and the president change, but if the system is not changed, there is always temptation for certain persons to do something. Now we are talking about some kind of culture which was mentioned by Sergei. There was a kind of mutual deception between the electorate and the parties. Parties seemingly was financed by some virtual own money, and they were meeting with the voters before the election. They promised something, they took care of a big election campaign and immediately forgot about their promises. And they actually they kept their promises to those donors who actually financed those parties. And the matter is that the parties are not reporting to the citizens, they're reporting to the donors. This couldn't be even measured. The biggest corruption is not even in the government, it's in the Verkhovna Rada, in the parliament. This is the place where they actually either pass the necessary decision or block the decisions. For example, why the parliament does not unblock the process of privatization of the state-run enterprises. We have 1,500 state-run enterprises, and the overwhelming majority of those are, let's say, are not profitable. If you are not profitable, if you are always on the lose side of that, you have to, you know what you do. You try to sell it for the best possible price, because this is on the terminal side. But the problem is, no, we are not going to sell anything, because the majority of those companies have some connections to the political forces. Through the shadow control over this and other enterprise, they believe them for a long time already as their own companies, long time ago privatized. And this actually makes the political forces be dependent on the business structures. And the fact that yesterday we adopted the law on the reporting of the political parties and use alternative sources of financing for the political parties, this without any exaggeration, historical or even historic events, when we can change the political culture, change the field for the players, we provide the possibility for new parties to surface. Maybe we will, who will cherish some other principles, and those parties will not have the financier who they owe to something, And in the end, what I would like to say, the same story is perhaps one of the irreversible reforms is the issue pertaining to the fact who, indeed, in this country, gets into the political bodies like Verkhovna Rada. The issue of, let's say, immunity of MPs. In fact, businessmen come to the Verkhovna Rada with the objective to protect themselves and their business. This is true, and this has been the case for over 20 years now. The Institute of Immunity, which is provided or stipulated by the Constitution, it doesn't carry out the function which was actually meant by the founder of the author Constitution, in order, to provide them the possibility for the MPs to speak up their political mind, and then to propose some kind of draft laws or draft regulations, not to be influenced by anybody else. But in fact, the MP's mandate is considered some kind of the personal protection against persecution. I am not a follower of the complete, let's say, rejection of immunity, because under the situation of young democracy, Ukrainian principles, speaking principles, young democracy, there is always a risk because our law enforcement system, the judicial system, which hasn't been reformed completely, when we in such situation we are going to leave the immunity from the peace, then we are going to reach another extreme situation. We are going to have the silent parliament. Nobody is going to speak up. Everybody will just will praise the General Prosecutor General, the head of the police, the head of the anti-corruption bureau. We do not need such kind of parliament in this country either. But when we have to limit the immunity both for the judges and MPs, this is true. This will give us a chance to bring to the parliament other people who are not going to protect their own business, but will take their professional duties. German parliament actually consists 80% or almost of the professional lawyers, because this is a major task of the parliament. There is no big businessman in German parliament. I talked to different parties, and they told me that business is not represented in parliament for the last 40 years, because this is not efficient to do that, because in the sphere of business you can achieve more than in the sphere of the politics. So I do hope that the change and transformation will take place in the political system. And for that to happen, we are doing a lot of things which maybe you do not notice. We are talking about transparency of the property, the transparency of reporting political party, the issue of decentralization. We do have to do that. We have to remove some political discussion. We are talking about the immunity or limitation of the immunities of MPs and the judicial system. This is also judicial system reform, because without the latter reform, we won't reach any efficiency. We can delegate all the responsibilities to the local authorities. We can reform the system of implementation of the judicial rulings. By the way, yesterday there were two comprehensive laws which were discussed, pertain to the interests of millions of Ukrainians. New laws how to realize or implement the judicial rulings. Now the government just deceives the people. The citizens actually receive the decision of the court or rule in the court, but then practically they cannot implement it. And only 20%, and it's very optimistic, in only 20% of the cases you can do something about that. When we actually adopted the laws which reformed the implementation of the court rulings in the first reading, and they said, okay, you're reforming those decisions, but who is making those decisions? The same old judges. So you're going to change the something how to implement it, but again, this could be a legal decision, because this ruling will be made, or is going to be made by the same judges which remained in their seats. What they did in Georgia, they carried out, implemented a lot of reforms, but they did not finish the judicial reform. The same situation they faced in the Baltic states. We communicated with a lot of experts, and they said a lot. They said we made a great mistake. We did not replace all the judges who we inherited after the disintegration of Soviet Union, after the Soviet era. And with a certain corruption level in the judicial system as well. That's why the judicial reform. This is my opinion, this is my position as a person, as the citizen, the Minister of Justice. This can be possible only in the format of the complete, let's say, rebooting or reloading, if you would, of the whole system. We partially take care of the appointment of new prosecutors, but without the completing the reform, judicial reform, we cannot do anything else. A lot of work to be done, but if you try to find the reasons why not to introduce some change or transformation now, this is the wrong approach. Some of the MPs yesterday told me, you do not start the judicial or court rulings reform because you did not change the judicial core. You know, maybe we have to do something which you can do and which you believe right to do. We are doing something along those lines. I would like to appreciate the efforts of Sergei Leshchenko and a number of other MPs who tried to explain to other MPs yesterday that failure to adopt the government-presented laws, not only they're going to torpedo the possibility of our Ukrainian citizens to go to Europe without any visa, but this is the, we have to return to the European path. It would be just a gross crime on their part if they did not vote for those laws. They mentioned a lot of good things about those laws. I understand why, because it's very difficult for the parliament to adopt any kind of anti-corruption law, because they are reading those draft laws and they just put it through the prism of their own interests or their partners' interests. But okay, it's very good that we adopted that in the first reading, and I believe that the package of visa-free laws is just part of Ukraine's for implementing their commitments undertaken by Ukraine within the framework of the Ukraine-EU agreement. Sergei, together with other young MPs, yesterday to manage to persuade the audience there, other MPs, and we had enough votes. And I believe that the discussion we have now at this point of time will be conducive to the positive changes, will affect our MPs for them to be more active in their duties and their activities and work. Thank you. Thank you for this kind of presentation of the broad-scale, wide-scale program of plan of actions and what has been achieved. And now it's time to introduce the head of chairman of the Antimonopoly Committee, and just to explain to you why we invited Mr. Yuriy Terentyev to participate in this roundtable, because there was a lot of things within the competence of the Minister of Justice, but Antimonopoly Committee is very often associated with something which has to ensure de-oligarchization and breaking all those monopolies, etc., etc., etc. But for a long time now, here in this UCMC center and all different platforms, we've been talking that it's not the task to punish or not punish anybody, but to ensure the correct policy to protect the right to competition. For several months now, there was some work being carried out in the parliament and the Verkhovna Rada, and we would like you to tell us how, if you're talking about protection of the economic competition, business activities, if we were talking about transparency on the anti-committee activities, maybe I know that there is a regulator's role, and I know as a dialogue has been established with some of the profile regulators, how it affects on the culture of introducing a new atmosphere in Ukraine and the influence of the big business on your activities. Thank you. If you are talking about the Antimonopoly Committee.
Blaming the Antimonopoly Committee and its practices for the 20 years, it was blamed of non-transparency. Who started talking about the economic competition, defense, and practices of application of regulations? Non-transparency was the first thing which the discussions and debates started with. For us, for the new composition of the Antimonopoly Committee, the issue of transparency in our activities is in fact the main principle which we build our activities on. Talking in more simple terms, the transparency issue may be divided into two blocks: what we do and how we do our activities. First is if we start from our internal processes. Maybe this is not very apparent to the grassroots public, these procedures of operations of the Anti-Monopoly Committee. We made a lot of steps forward for the 5 months which have passed from the date of my appointment to the office at the beginning of September. For the first time during the Antimonopoly Committee activities, recommendations were adopted on the procedure of fines. It was a fundamental issue which blocked transparency of Antimonopoly Committee activities and the issue of defining strict criteria of setting fines and setting liability is reflected in the EU-Ukraine association agreement. So we didn't wait for the laws to be adopted which would bind our committee to develop this methodology. We have adopted the methodology on our own proactive initiative. The other question we address now, we address the issue of including to the agenda of implementation of EU-Ukraine association agreement is a strict more clear assessment of concentration, definition of concentrations and obligations of the parties in the process of applications for economic concentrations, and more clear procedure of identifying monopolic companies on the goods marketplace. These are the main practical issues which we address and which raise the most claims blaming us in vague approaches. So we should draft updated documents on these three issues and to start the process of official approval of these three documents. Now the Parliament has the draft law pending on the methodology of fines. We support it, and we are not afraid that Antimonopoly Committee will be then working in a strict framework. This is not a problem for us. Undoubtedly, as for me in person as the chairman of the committee, the problem is that if we look at the internal processes inside the Antimonopoly Committee, if we compare them with the best practices in the world in public administrations and in business companies, the processes are not standardized and they are not unified. And my task in person as the chairman of the committee is to the maximum all the steps which we do in the Antimonopoly Committee during our law enforcement and practical activities, all the steps should be implemented on the basis of transparent and understandable algorithms. So that when we start investigating one entity, we should make the same steps while investigating the other entity, so that we approach them with the similar approach. The standards of high quality should also be followed. I think this is my main task. But, and I should do that before the end of the year, how we operate according to the law on the Antimonopoly Committee. This is primarily our internal matter. We also have the issue what we do. When we are talking about transparency of the practices of our law enforcement activity, we should abandon the past practices when every year the Antimonopoly Committee issued 2,000 or 3,000 decisions on misuse of competition and so on, but we can see that the fate of monopolic markets and monopolized marketplaces in the structure of economy of Ukraine, it has been growing constantly. So we can see, in fact, that the objectives which the Antimonopoly Committee focused on, those tasks were not relevant to us. In our practices, in our headquarters practices and our regional branches, we paid too much attention, and we are now paying attention to more to the issues of consumer rights protection, which is the other regulators' competence. That is why talking about our principal cases during the last 3 months, there were issues, as you know, the energy sector and investigations in the air transportation and research in the light oil products sector. All these investigations and researches were started openly to the maximum. We have hold debates with the public in order to identify all the problems which the entity face, so that so that we can change the system in general, but not just some individual aspects. Our activity in the air transportation market could be taken as an example. The Council for Security and Defense took a decision before the administration of President took a decision. We held several communication events and the round table where all stakeholders at the air transportation market, not only air companies, but airports and state air service and handling companies, booking offices, air tickets booking offices, all the stakeholders participated in the round table. All the companies which contribute to the added value in the air industry, air transportation industry. And the debates resulted in compiling the requirements, so the state air service and airports received the recommendations from us how to mend their violations. And soon we are going to initiate suits to protect economic competition in this sector. An individual matter, there are several issues which are also of high importance in this aspect. What we do and how we do. This is publishing of our decisions. Prior to this year, the website of the Antimonopoly Committee had only several decisions published. So the practice of publishing the decision was almost lacking. But if we publish the decisions, we can have trust and when we do not explain why one entity is prescribed the fine of 50,000 hryvnias and for the other entity the other amount of fine, such cases should be explained and published at the website. But there were no precedents of publishing the decisions. This practice hasn't developed yet, but not waiting for the law to be adopted, our committee in July decided to publish all decisions of the committee, and now we have already been publishing the decisions at the website, and you can see them there. Of course, we expect that it would be possible to publish more full content of these decisions once the law is passed, which would bind us to publish the decisions. It is now pending in the Verkhovna Rada, and it would be considered at this session in the parliament, and when the law is passed, then we would be bound to publish all our judgments. This law, in our opinion, is a very positive development and will have a positive influence on systemic nature of our activities. Also, I told already that the objective of the Antimonopoly committee is to develop. We have the first draft communication strategy, and at least once in 2 weeks we use public platforms to communicate the latest developments in our activities. For example, the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center is one of such platforms, but the communication activities should be continuous and permanent in the Antimonopoly Committee, and I ordered that all our top officers should perform communication activities so that possible violations in the marketplaces should be known to the public, and so that the entities has enough information and to enable them to correct violations which they committed. And by the end of the year, compliance training will be developed, and it will be used for mass communication with the entities, and such prevention activities and elucidation of the rules of fair conduct at the marketplaces. For Anti-Monopoly Committee, the transparency of our activities is both the task and the fundamental principle.
Thank you. I would like to give the floor. Okay. If you have a short question, because we are going to have the question and answers later. Introduce yourself. Chairman of the Ukrainian Public Organization, Passive Ukrainians. And the first question I would like to address to Minister of Justice and Mr. Terentyev. I'm talking about the rights of consumers, which have been whose rights have been reduced, and we are talking about the ordinary citizens who have to pay today a very big judicial charge when they are going to lodge a suit about the violation of their rights. What's the opinion of Mr. Minister of Justice? And they were talking about the one-time monopoly committee, how an ordinary Ukrainian citizens whose rights have been violated as a consumer. Yeah, I'm talking about the card of the Kyiv citizen. This is the monopoly of the Chrestiatic Bank. Today, the pensioners without this card cannot use the municipal transport, like an underground metro, which is also monopolized. And how our top officials in the ministries can explain this situation. What is your vision? How the situation will change or not change in the future? Because this is a very urgent problem. I can't. Well, I do not say that there is corruption in the court, because this kind of entrepreneurial system, not court, and everything can be bought, and any court is kind of founded by the chairman of the court, and he provides these court and employees with the number of services, and they sell their decisions for as much money as possible. This is not something that they are not elected by our citizens, and this is another relation. Again, this is something which is within the competence of the Ministry of Justice. Well, I believe that regarding the courts, just to provide the comments, Number one, the Minister of Justice does not have any influence on the court, on the higher judicial council. No, according to the Ukrainian constitution, the Minister of Justice doesn't have a single lever how to influence the judges or the judicial court or judicial system. They are absolutely independent. So the Minister of Justice is just a member, one of the 19 members of the higher judicial council. And I personally very specifically express my mind regarding some of the judges, but unfortunately we do not have any influence. Maybe from the point of view of the democracy it would be right to have it, but this is my own personal position, and I'm speaking it up. We have to reload completely, reboot the judicial system, and now we're working the committee under the president. Again, by the way, we have, I as a member of that higher judicial commission, I have only one vote, and I speak up my mind. After the Venetian committee returned us to different alternatives, one is more radical, which is supporting what I'm talking, the new selection of all the judges. Another is more conservative, after which the parliament has to decide something. And I believe at least the faction of the People's Front, and I'm a member of that faction or of that party, we are in favor of the personal changes in the judicial core. And very shortly about the rights of the consumers, that the ordinary people in Ukraine do not have, they cannot exercise their complete rights through the courts. They're restricted in their rights. I believe the measure must be the principle of justice. The person which is underpaid or is not provided with necessary subsistence, you have to have the privileges or the benefits. People who make good money should not have any privileges or benefits. And when, for example, in the Ukrainian state budget, they allocated about, commercially speaking, 1 million hryvnia for some kind of beneficial, let's say, the privileged transportation, and actually the demand was 16 billion hryvnia to cover everybody. Then nobody would receive that, because the person who receives the minimum pension, they would be kind of spread over the whole society, like this average temperature in the world, But those people who, maybe had to have this benefit, but privilege, they do not have it because our laws has been written this way. We have 126 bureaus for the free legal aid provided by the lawyers all over the country. And we have to provide this kind of assistance or aid to the pensioners, disabled persons, to area participants, and those who lost their property in Donbass and Lugansk region. This assistance is as follows. The lawyer who is hired by the state, he can help the citizens to lodge a suit, including the violation of the consumer's rights, and the government pays for this procedure. So any person can address any center. I'm not talking about regional centers. We're talking about legal aid centers. So we provide this assistance or aid to everybody who requires that. And actually, the state, the government pays for this person who doesn't have enough substance. If we are talking about some entrepreneur or businessman who makes good money, then this person who can afford that will go to court and pay this kind of charge, about 7,000 hryvnia. If you have to pay 7,000 hryvnia, perhaps you're disputing a case worth of 70 million maybe. Can all of our citizens pay 7,000 hryvnia? No. So that's why the government has to help those who cannot afford and pay themselves for the court decision or court consideration, whatever else. And the rich persons have to themselves to pay for that. This is justice. Answering the question regarding the card of the Key White and the Kherchatic Bank, I cannot give the answer now. I will contact the people concerned. I'm going to leave the telephone of my reception room. So please call me in the end of the day and we will provide you the information, answer your specific question. Thank you for your answers. I also would like to say that we already several times we emphasized the importance of the decision to create such legal aid centers, because this openness requires the proactive position of all the citizens. That's why the legal aid centers are very instrumental here. But I would like to come back to our topic and come back to the first speech by Sergei Leshchenko, who mentioned that now the initiative, the ball is passed to the active persons, to the civil society. So I would like to ask you to say a few words what is being done now, what kind of tools you can use by those people who actually investigate different cases. I'm talking about investigate the journalists, or even maybe you first, and then you will pass mic to your colleague. Thank you. Indeed, I would like to tell you about how interesting this tool is and what we plan to do with that. And we are going to call upon journalists to work with the open registers. Now we have the information about the real estate. We are receiving the information about the vehicles, cars, plots of land, etc. So far, if we do not find the coincidence between the declaration of the official and what he really has, this is just a scandal, which is good for the journalists. If everything is okay and everything works, the new system of declaration starts to work, on which a new law has been adopted, and there is some kind of agency, anti-corruption agency is going to start working. And that means that, in fact, following that, we are going to have this tool, for example, discrepancy between the declaration and the reality. This will give will you be able to open a criminal case about this, the officer or the official or the politician who, number one, just gave the line in his declaration. He has to explain where this person took the money. So there are two different crimes: failure to provide the true information and illegal money made. And I believe this will be give a lot of chances for journalists for their investigations and for the public at large to know more. Starting from April 1 next year, this new system of declaration is going to become effective, and those niches will be minimized. I'm talking about these niches or those handouts which are used by the politicians to hide their, different schemes or about their hidden, concealed bank accounts. I believe that Dmytro will tell more about that because he's well aware about that. Those declarations will be in line. Also part of the register. We lobby that in the among the legislators, and this information about real estate. You can have an access to register real estate and compare it for yourself. What does it mean to all of us? That means that illegal property in the hands of the official becomes like a hot subject or a hot roll, which actually burns your hands, and it's not so easy to let's say to swallow. And we are not only depriving some people some of their offices, but it will threaten them with some imprisonment and term of imprisonment. And this is kind of some anti-corruption action. So we are talking about transparency and helping the journalists, but also this is also the tool to do something through the judicial system, and just to warn the officials and the different clerks that they should not play with such kind of things. So again, if we do, also we try to reach the extra level, not only to put the corruptionist to prison or to jail, but it means that his property, legal property, will be confiscated or seized, even if he delegate his rights to that to some third persons who try to hide them or something, or at least property or real estate somewhere else. So if you can do that, then we can build a big wall between the business and the official, which will substantially affect the level of corruption in this country. For example, we have some experience in talking with our, again, country's colleagues. Romania, they made the first step. They have something similar to our anti-corruption bureau, which is very instrumental in putting different corrupted officials to prison. But it turned out several years later that the same officials still are involved in taking bribes. They put them to jails, but they still are involved in some bribing. That means that corruption is very lucrative business and very beneficial business. For example, you paid $7 million euros to pay to the course. You just spent a couple of years in the prison, but you still have your 10 million left or 9 million left. If we are going to confiscate all those 10 millions, then we can follow this whole all the links of the chain, and then we are talking about the official which will work for his salary and work for the interest of the state, and we are going to provide those narrow framework which is going to be established by law on one hand, and which is on the other hand will exercise control on the part of the civil society through journalists, and I believe through the efficient and anti-corruptive prosecutors' offices. So I call upon everybody to work actively with the registers and look forward to the beginning of the declaration campaign on the part of the officials. I believe in that case we'll have a more interesting situation. We'll have more, let's say, grounds to get here together and discuss what happened and how it worked. You know, Dmitry, your experience in investigation and revealing necessary information, how it works if you're talking about a new approach to openness on the part of the officials, authorities, etc. Thank you for the floor given to me. First of all, I would like to thank the Minister of Justice, being a kind of a locomotive in different transformations and through creating openness, creating the necessary tools and instruments. Regarding the situation described by Ivan, I believe it's less optimistic, and I'll explain why. Now we actually developed a very good speed regarding the openness of different data and creating some tools. We still don't know how efficient or effective those tools are going to be, because behind this tool or instrument must be somebody who is going to use this tool or the instrument. I believe this is not the last step. This is not the last tool, and one of those tools, as one said, will be the declaration online, which will provide everybody an opportunity to verify how his manager or the director of the kindergarten is rich or not. But there is a small problem, which is as follows. Somebody has to use those instruments and tools, but let's be honest. You cannot use 50 or 100 anti-corruption journalists to cover all those issues. The subject of the declaration in Ukraine will be 700 to 800,000 people. We cannot possibly physically use those people, 100 journalists, to verify everything. We need the support of the civil society. We have to teach our citizens, to tell them what kind of opportunities appear. We have to, let's say, to stimulate them. And one of the hindrances that we have to pay to have an access to the register of real estate. Being a journalist, I don't know, you can spend maybe 100 or 200, 1,000 hryvnia if you're interested who is the manager of the school or where your children study. Maybe 1,000 hryvnia is quite a big sum of money, which is also very difficult to do. Today, the cases which we have based on this information, in the best case, they can lead to just to persuade this another corrupted official to resign or to retire. And of course, this leads to the situation when the journalists raise a lot of hullabaloo, the scandal. First, number one, to find this corrupted official and push him out of the office. Number two, we do not have the operational instruments or tools which will help us to oust those officials. As soon as we have cases, good cases, successful cases, when some from the civil society, representative of civil society, will be successful in, let's say, in firing this official from his office, then we'll have a lot of different set of instruments and tools which we have to know how to use, but we cannot stop. The bottom line is we shouldn't stop at what we achieved. Number two, part of the anti-corruption efforts of the journalists, they have to switch their attention, we have to switch our attention to civil society, to teach them, to explain everything to them, to teach them how to use those tools and not to spend too much money on that. And number three, we had to find the methods how to respond to such cases, how to fire those corrupted officials, how to confiscate their property. As you understand, this is you encounter the wall on the, let's say, resistance part of, let's say, the law enforcement bodies, including the prosecutor's office. I'll give the floor to Yuriy to say a few words. Let's say he's dealing with the investigations within the framework of the center. That's why we are talking about the transparency of the Antimonopoly Committee, and the transparency of the registers is a very good tool to study the development of the economy of Ukraine. So your position, please.
Yes, I'm co-director of the Center of Economic Strategies, and the matter of access to data is very important for us, and I just welcome the initiatives and the laws that have been adopted and which the minister voiced out today. And if you don't mind, Taras, I would return to the more fundamental issue, the topic of your briefing, information disclosure as a tool of de-oligarchization and combating corruption. I can hear that all the panel now is talking about the sins associated with negative incentives, that is punishment, to open information in order to punish someone who have stolen something. This topic is very important, and it has been thoroughly explained today at this briefing. When I see the word de-oligarchization, I think that we should not only punish the people, but we should build the society which has welfare, and where the feeling of justice is, then people will start to invest in the economy. I think this aspect has not yet been addressed at this meeting. I can give examples of numerous researches where the societies which are more open and respectively which have more trust inside the society, they are more prosperous. So tools of de-oligarchizations, when I see this term, I think why we should de-oligarch our society. Our purpose is to build more fair the society which is built on the feeling of more justice, because there is more well-being, higher well-being and living standards in the society. This matter would be better addressed, for example, by the Securities Protection Commission, so that they provide incentives for economic growth through investment in securities, and this is the real purpose. And how can we do that? It is very important that this civil society should play an important role, and it plays it. It has stirred up its activities, and the mass media also has accelerated the activities. It could be the topic for an individual briefing, and some oligarchs, for example, stopped to run to the parliament because they are now in the list of politically not good persons. And compliance procedure to being an MP in Ukraine, the person can't get a loan in the Netherlands, then automatically he loses his his willingness to be an MP. I know Mr. Sergei Leshchenkov for a long time, and I tried to invite him to various conferences on corruption topics, but I instead would like to tell that let's open information, but just for the purpose of getting more investment and building better society, more welfare. You know, the idea is not to punish, but to develop the competitive environment in the country. And indeed, I think our roundtable discussion has a purpose, that we really have the tool and we have primary targets, but in the long run we can talk about higher trust, establishing higher trust and more openness and better attitude to business and to politicians so that they can reach their goals. I would like to add that there are several matters on non-transparency of final beneficiaries or structure of Ukrainian or international business groups. Historically, we have had a not very transparent system of the owners of businesses, so threshold indicators will be changed today. The Verkhovna Rada will hear the draft law today when we have adopted our recommendations on penalties. We understood that the transparency in ownership relations should be tackled, and the amnesty on concentrations in the past years should be as well performed, and economic entities which applied to the Antimonopoly Committee and opened the deeds on concentrations in the past time, and where the Antimonopoly Committee banned them to concentrate, so the violations could be of technical nature, and the person understands that the entity understands that it is a violator and it is afraid of the penalty of 5% of the turnover, annual turnover. Then we indicated that where an economic entity applied to us and opened the past deeds where they were forbidden the concentration, so then they are inflicted only a minimum penalty. This would when we talk about the monopolization on the marketplaces, when we see that this was really a violation, then we can ban such a deed and open proceedings, but we understand that we should provide the opportunity to Ukrainian businessmen to go to the light, to step out of the shadow and to start working with the Antimonopoly Committee within the legislative framework, not being afraid of some very high penalties, and also being afraid of some corruption factor, that someone can come to them and inflict a penalty of 5% of the annual turnover. Thank you. And just to sum up, I would like to say that our goal is not just to told about the successes during the previous several weeks and the transparency in the society and the state. We would like to talk about the de-oligarchization as the classical term and logo combating corruption. It also has some day-to-day dimension. Through transparency in the society, we can clean our power, our top leaders and our economy, and not only through criminal proceedings, but just through honest conduct and life of politicians and businessmen, and all the tools which are adopted, they are not to punish, but they are but for all of us to live transparently and this way to add to the welfare and well-being in our society. So de-oligarchization and combating corruption will much depend on practices of public authorities and how economic researchers and mass media will use this openness of an information to disseminate it about the data of on ownership of property, so that normal discussion in the society is enabled, and indeed the things which has been happening in Ukraine, they step by step bring us to those structural changes which we dreamt about in the past. So the better opportunities we will have in the future.
У мене тільки прохання, якщо можна, у кого є запитання до мене, тому що мені треба їхати в уряд.
Ну давайте, але будь ласка, якщо можна, то по темі і лаконічно. Давайте по темі. Почекайте. Є людина, яка...
По очереди. Информационное агентство QVC, Крымские новости, Вишневецкий Василий. Вы затронули две интересные темы, в частности. Я бы хотел, чтобы вы расшифровали немножечко, что такое ограниченная неприкосновенность депутатская. И, да, и второе, это по децентрализации. То есть, какое ваше отношение вот к тем предложениям, которые сейчас в парламенте, в контексте конституционной реформы, потому что там очень большой раскол, в том числе и в экспертном сообществе. Некоторые эксперты называют это не децентрализация, а суперцентрализация, да? В том числе бывшие судьи Конституционного суда, к чьему мнению надо прислушиваться.
Я просто єдине, що перш ніж дати відповідь, скажу, що ці теми окремо дискутуються у нас, тому я думаю, що буде можливість ще детальніше проводити.
Я роз'ясню дуже коротко. Венеціанська комісія, коли робила попередній висновок на проект змін щодо
Conclusion for the draft amendments on immunity lifting from the MPs and court judges, that without reformed system there will be a risk of political persecutions against the MPs, not for the criminally liable actions but for political views. So we decided to make some control on responsibility. You know, 1.5 years ago, during the Revolution of Dignity, I was an MP for the Batkivshina faction, and I was one of coordinators of the legal headquarters at Maidan. I went to detention centers and I made speeches. And if there was no immunity then, my subordinates told me in Kiev detention centers several cells which were intended for MPs.
Yeah, you know, we had immunity, everybody will be next day arrested and put to jail, you know, I mean MPs, members of the parliament. So the revolution which took place the way it took, you know, should be there, whatever happened, but over 100 MPs who were actively involved in that process. We had some mechanism, we could, you know, militia was like the ordinary people, but there was some mechanism. We had a platform to speak up our minds in the parliament and tell the truth to the society. So this is a very simple example when authoritarian system without a protection of opposition deputy can actually ruin or, let's say, eliminate, liquidate the whole democracy. As regards the absolute immunity as we had today, no, it is not correct. The same like in the court, I can tell you more. Our judges are more protected today than our MPs, because to bring to criminal responsibility the judge who actually was caught red-handed, you know, in addition that the decision to must be taken in the parliament to lift the immunity. Then, in addition to that, also the Supreme Judge has to confirm that or support that the judge who was not elected by the people, or whatever, he has no mandate to lift the immunity for the fact that he killed his neighbor who was involved in bribe. We need the decision on a big number of the people to do that, you know. So my position, which is also the position of additional committee, the parliament has to have a certain mechanism. Number one, if a deputy, if MP committed an intentional crime of violence, for example, he killed somebody or murdered somebody, and he was caught red-handed, there should be no question regarding his or her immunity. The same must hold for the judges. I mean, the committing the grave crime and being red-handed, and then any kind of a mechanism, judicial mechanism, must be applied to judges, to any other citizen of this country. As regards other types of crimes, definitely we have to improve the mechanism how to lift the immunity. There could be different options. One of them was proposed by the experts of the Nation Commission. So let's say 150 votes in the parliament, not 226. 150 would be enough, and the conclusion of Constitutional Court that this doesn't violate the norms of the Constitution, based on the request of the Prosecutor General's office. Could be different alternative, some simplified case when they have decided just in the parliament. In practically all the member states of the European Union, they have so-called functional immunity for their speaking their minds, for the public position, for the draft laws to be submitted. The deputy cannot be responsible in any way, because this is his work. His electorate, his voters actually elected him to express their own position and their points of view, or the criticism they are part of the government or the law enforcement body's activities. He should not be brought to court or whatever. So summing up, the immunity of MP. So if any MP committed a grave crime and was caught red-handed, usual procedure should be applied to any citizen in Ukraine: detention, arrest, and sentence, and a verdict to be. Then we have to have a simplified procedure, or in the parliament, parliament has to decide, or to decrease the number of the votes required for passing the decision. Instead of 226, just 150. But to leave the complete immunity of the MP as a political figure, when they will bring him to the court or to criminal responsibility just for his boldness, let's say, or being dare to criticize somebody, you know. In some countries, they have the absolute immunity, which have a big history of democracy. In most of the European countries, they have this kind of differential approach. And we have to change those systems which do not meet today's realities. When we have democratic president, democratic government, democratic coalition, the Verkhovna Rada, you know, this is something which is provided for the many years to come, and those must prevent the possibility of coming back to revanchist, let's say, sentiments. If the deputies are going to be absolutely unprotected against any prosecution, we are going to have the silent parliament, who will, as I mentioned before, just saying, the glory to the head of the police, to the Supreme Court managers or government, whoever else. Speaking about the registers, are they completely operational? And somebody said that there were some problems with the access to the register of the Minister of Interior. Well, I can comment on the register of the Minister of the Interior. This is their own block. As for the register of the Minister of Justice, yes, for several days this register was operational for several days in test regime, in test mode, and a lot of citizens actually tried to get access simultaneously. We actually improved on that situation. This system, technically speaking, is a bit slow, but there are no big time failures. As regards the register by the State Land Cadastre Committee, as far as I know, they already reached the normal regime mode of their operation. Maybe your colleagues will tell you some more. What's the situation with the register with the Minister of the Interior, either in access or not, and when it is going to appear? This register, they so far failed to resolve some of the technical issues, but the technical assignment they encountered, you know, this objectively speaking rather complex, so you cannot work with the register of the Minister of Interior, and our task is to follow, to monitor this in order for this access to be implemented. As for the state geocadastre, unfortunately, I didn't have an opportunity to look into this matter, the rights to the real estate, or whatever. During the first day, it was really difficult. And during the presentation in the committees, even there were some problems. But as the engineer, the technical experts, understand why those problems appeared, because everybody just rushed to try to get an access. But late in the evening, I already could use that. Whatever I wanted to find, I found there. You know, there were some cases when somebody found some kind of a big house or estate, a big plot of land, but when we were talking, I was trying to find those in the register, but I could not support this kind of information. I spent several hundred hryvnia on that, so maybe somebody was just mistaken, or maybe somebody has improved on the information which is downloaded. So if anybody has this kind of discrepancy cases, inform us. Okay, Natalia Kucher, Источник info. How can we do the legislative acts or other laws so that neither the government on the state privatization, property fund, so that nobody can have information about some kind of concession agreement. For example, the port Yuzhny, this number one. Number two, the government is preparing a big-time privatization, and perhaps big oligarchs are going to participate in that. But for example, Zhivago, whose bank is almost bankrupt, and his shares are dropping down, but he would like to participate in the concession for the port Yuzhny. So what can you say about that if you're talking about de-oligarchization? I'll start to answer this question. Speaking in principle, similar, certain bodies have to make their contribution, but I will put this way, to bring the transparency in such issues. We as an Antimonopoly committee, we give a permission to some concentration. There is some transaction, not just action, but if we are talking about the property complex or whatever else in such transaction falls within the necessary criteria, we come up with our conclusion. We analyze what kind of control is on the part of the buyer or the seller. When we see that the buyer is kind of the faked person, or let's say false person, for some kind of offshore company in the Crimea, which do not have their own capital, we can investigate in depth, because through the financing could be something done. For example, stated capital 10 pounds of sterling, there is a company which issues the loan without any interest rate, without any collateral for this company to use this money. We can see that the company which finances this transaction is actually the controller, and then we can further see who is the beneficiary of this company, or how transparently all the information was opened regarding this enterprise or company. So in fact, on the one hand, partially the problem will be resolved with the complete publication of the decision on Antimonopoly Committee on the issues related to concentration, because unfortunately so far the subject entities can exercise their right to use the kind of this approach as confidentiality of the information, and so far we cannot publish through the internet the complete information about the transaction. If we have such a this the master will bring everything to order here. Partially we can resolve this situation by the actions of the Antimonopoly Committee. Also, I would like to add, we had yesterday the chairman of the State Property Fund in Ukraine. He was talking about that the majority of the questions regarding the transparency privatization can be resolved by a certain draft law, which has been submitted for consideration by the Verkhovna Rada. We are talking about the restriction of the activities of the company's risks, which are not under some suspicion or suspected companies, whatever. Anything to add to this? If not, I believe you can continue your talk behind the